If you are a regular listener to the Sociology Show, then you could help with the costs of promoting and hosting the podcast. If you can spare even a small amount, then you can donate on the GoFundMe.com website by searching for The Sociology Show. There is no obligation, of course, and all future downloads will continue to be free. A huge thank you to all those that have already donated. Your kind gesture will help to continue keep the show going and growing. Best wishes and keep enjoying the show.
Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and in each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research and their experiences. So put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to The Sociology Show. The Sociology Show podcast is brought to you in association with Tutor2You Sociology, the exam performance specialist for A-level and GCSE sociology students and teachers. You can visit tutor2you.net/sociology, and there you can pick up revision guides, flashcards, revision videos and everything else that you need for your A-level or GCSE sociology studies. And so my guest for this episode is Dr Alicia Walker. Alicia, thank you for joining me.
No, thanks for having me.
Thank you. And do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do first before we get into your research?
Sure. I am an assistant professor at a university in Missouri. I am a professor of sociology, and my research agenda centers around intimate sexual relationships, gender and sexuality, and I have a particular interest in closeted behaviors. I'm particularly interested in those behaviors that folks tend to keep secret.
I think we all are, aren't we? Everyone's a little bit nosy, aren't they?
Sure.
And where did sociology start for you, Alicia?
Kind of late, actually. I was in the midst of getting my master's in education, as I used to be a classroom teacher, and I was working on my thesis. And my professor said, "Are you a closet sociologist?" I said, "I don't know. Am I?" Because all of my theorists that I was using were sociologists. And so I started getting into the discipline and realized that was really where I should be. That was really my home. And so I got my, I got my PhD in sociology, but my previous degrees were in totally other fields, which is not uncommon in sociology, but there is a learning curve when you come into the PhD and you don't have the background.
And you just said you were using sociologists. Was there particular theorists that kind of piqued your interest then?
Yeah, with what I was doing with my education research, all the theorists that I chose, apparently, I don't think I even noticed or paid attention. I just liked what they had to say. You know, I was like, oh yeah, this applies to what I'm talking about. But they were all sociologists. Oh, well, one of them was Dr. Edward Morris. And I can remember that because I went to University of Kentucky to work with him.
Right. And you said you're interested in closeted behaviour. Can I ask why? Why are you so curious? Because it's such an interesting area that you do research.
Yeah, it is. It's really fascinating. I don't know exactly. It started with the master's. I was a classroom teacher, and I noticed that I had all of these male students were very bright, very engaged in class, and had really insightful, thoughtful commentary to make. And then they just wouldn't turn their work in. You know, and I'd have to work really hard to get them to turn their work in. And when they turned it in, the work was good. And so that was, really kind of puzzling. And then you talk to other teachers and find out, oh yeah, no, they do this. They do this in all their classes. So it's like, that's really curious. And so that was actually the topic of my master's thesis, was looking at boys who purposely underperform. I think in the UK they call it laddishness, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so what I found through that study was just really, really fascinating, was that there's this whole, kind of internal narrative that these boys had that they could hardly articulate to you, but they had clearly, thought about it and were operating under it, if that makes sense. And as we would talk in the interviews, they would end up having this really emotional response to what we're talking about. Many of them cried, and basically what came out was the reasons for what they were doing was very secret. And so that was kind of fascinating to me, just this whole idea that, you know, we walk around in the world and we interact with people and we have this whole persona, but then some of us have this entire other persona that, you know, we just box up all day, right? And we only let that out with certain folks in certain settings. That's kind of fascinating to me. It seems on one level kind of exhausting, right? And maybe it seems that way to me because I'm just sort of myself all the time. You just get what you get, for better or for worse. Sometimes maybe that's not the best thing. And so that's really fascinating to me, this idea that folks have this like public face that they put on, but then they have this entire secret life that they don't talk to very many people about, or, you know, most people don't know about. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Is that more prevalent in males, do you think? Because I know you've written books on both men and women. Is that kind of secret life, not showing emotions, not showing your real feelings, is that more prevalent in males?
I think stoicism is definitely more prevalent in males, at least here in the United States, because, you know, we really encourage men to not show any emotions. We encourage them to pretend they don't really even have any, right? So I think that aspect definitely is more prevalent in males here in the States. The secret life, I don't know. I've sure talked to a ton of men and women who are carrying on totally secret lives. So I don't know that really has a gendered aspect to it.
Yeah. And you just mentioned secret life. So should we get into your first publication that I want to talk about?
Sure.
I'll give the full title. The Secret Life of the Cheating Wife, Power, Pragmatism and Pleasure in Women's Infidelity. Did I get that right?
That is correct, yeah.
Excellent. So
it's a mouthful, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it is. Tell us how that all started. How did you get into that?
Okay, well, so my habit, and it's been my habit for as long as I can remember, is to start the morning reading the news. And, you know, now that we have the internet, your news is very tailored to you, right? Because the algorithms. And so a lot of the news that I get has to do with relationships. And so over about a 6-month period or so, I happened to notice 3 different articles about infidelity that kind of made me go, 2 of them were not academic studies. They were websites for folks who cheat, who had run studies of their members. And one of them talked about the fact that in the 80s and 90% of their membership were not cheating to find a new spouse, which kind of challenged sort of the common sense ideas that had been presented to me. You know, we sort of have this idea that we think we know why folks are cheating, right? And one of the ideas is like they're mate shopping. And I was like, that's interesting. Well, they're not doing that on the site, so that's curious. And then a few months went by and I read another story, again from a website specializing in infidelity, that said that 80 and 90% of folks never get caught. Folks who are cheating never get caught. And it also caught my attention because we sort of have this idea that if somebody's cheating, it's going to come out, right? It's going to be discovered. Well, you know, that's not what that data said. So I was like, that's really interesting too. Okay. And then the third piece was an academic article that said that women between the ages of, I believe it was 40 and 45, were the most vulnerable to cheat. And I think I had just turned 40 or 41 or something when I read it. And I thought, wonder why. And, you know, the more I thought about it, the more interested I got because, of course, granted, I was in grad school. I was really tired. And thought, that sounds like a lot of work. So, you know, if they're not cheating to find a mate and they're not cheating to get caught and like force something out in the marriage, right? What's going on, right? What's this about? Yeah, so that kind of got the gerbil running the wheel. And the more I thought about it, the more interested I got. And I thought, you know, does it make people happier to cheat? You know, what is going on? What's the payoff? What is the benefit? And so the more I turned the idea over, the more I liked it. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to run a study to answer my own question. And originally I thought, I'm going to run a little pilot study, you know, 20 people or so and see what I come up with. Well, that didn't work because I couldn't figure out where to find my sample. You can't even really put up a flyer.
Well,
Who wants to be caught tearing the number off a flyer, right? Saying I cheat, right? Nobody wants to do that. It's not like I can stand out with a sign, honk if you cheat. That's, so I kind of sat on the idea for a while trying to figure out, I think this is a great idea, but where would I find these folks? And so then I remembered that I had read about a website called Ashley Madison in a women's magazine. It was like a red book or something like that. And some journalists had went undercover and all this kind of stuff. And so I thought, well, I don't think they're going to be interested in working with me. I'm just a peon grad student, right? But what's the worst that can happen? They tell me no. And so I sent them an email, kind of thinking I was probably not ever going to hear back from them. And within 24 hours, I had heard back from them. And they very graciously agreed to send out my recruitment call. And that turned my little idea of a study into kind of a large idea of a study. And then it sort of took on a life of its own.
Just for clarification, when you say cheating, are you talking about forming another relationship or sex? Let's put it bluntly.
I let people define for themselves.
Yeah.
And so far, everyone I've talked to is carrying on a sexual relationship with other folks.
And then, Alicia, something that grabbed my attention when I was just looking through the chapter names. Can I ask about chapter 2? I just read a bit that said chapter 2, a large penis is always welcome.
A large penis is always welcome, yes.
We've got to talk about that bit, haven't we? Could you just tell us what that chapter's about?
So that particular quote comes from the television show Rome. I don't know if you ever watched it on HBO. And one of the characters, Atia, says, a large penis is always welcome. And I thought of her as I was interviewing these women, and they were talking about the sorts of things that they vet their partners for. So that particular chapter is about women's vetting practices, right? And sort of how they figure out. Because when they log on the site, according to their own self-report, they're kind of inundated with messages.
Yeah.
If you're a warm female body on the site, you're going to get a lot of attention. And so they had to come up with these extensive vetting practices to figure out who they should even continue talking to, meet in person, et cetera. Because they can't meet all of them, right? They can't sleep with all of them.
Yeah.
Who has that kind of free time? So they came up with these vetting processes to figure out who they want to meet, who they want to talk to, and et cetera. And so many of them reported that they asked really extensive graphic questions about genitalia. They asked other questions too. They wanted to know about stamina and sexual style and what kinds of sex acts are you interested in and that sort of thing. But genital size came up more than once, definitely, which made me think of that quote, which I thought was a great title for that chapter.
Yeah, I just felt I had to ask you about that chapter. Could you tell us a little bit else about what you found about the sort of common stories, if you like?
Yeah, sure. So what I heard over and over, more than half of the sample said that they were in a primary partnership that was either sexless, meaning they're not having sex with their partner, or orgasmless. So I'm having sex with my partner, but it is not pleasurable for me. And so the women, other than the 7 women who are a subset of that group, so the bulk of the women said, I'm married to this guy and he's great and he's a great father and we're best friends and I have nothing but respect for him. I don't want to change anything. I don't want to not be married to him or anything like that. However, if I don't get my sexual needs met, I'm not going to be able to continue staying in this relationship. So what they were trying to do is outsource a specific aspect of that relationship, i.e. the sexual part, to a more skilled, more interested third party, if you will. And by doing that, they were more able to continue staying in the primary partnership, which I realize sounds counterproductive, right? I'm cheating to stay. But that's what I heard over and over and over. Women said, if I had to give this up, I don't think I could keep staying in my primary partnership, and that would break my partner's heart and break up my family and take my spouse away from my child, and I don't want to do any of those things. And so they were exercising what I call the infidelity workaround. You're sort of sidestepping the stigma and the expense and the frustration and difficulty of getting a divorce. You're maintaining that master status, and you're outsourcing your unmet needs to some third party. And women were extremely pragmatic about talking about that. They used really kind of economic language. They talk about, so the vetting process, for example, they would say, I'm going to get all of this crucial information out of the way up front because I don't want to talk to somebody and figure out he's a really nice guy, but we're not compatible because, as one woman put it, he can be nice all day, but that doesn't give me an orgasm, right? And they said, I'm already in a relationship that's not meeting my sexual needs, and I'm staying, and I have all this obligation to this person. I don't want to create another relationship like that. And so they were specific about, I'm trying to find a person to meet the specific set of criteria that I have to meet this very specific need. And many of them talked about maintaining multiple concurrent outside partnerships alongside those marriages. And they explained that in very pragmatic terms as well. They said, I have already had the situation where I've sort of put all my eggs in one basket with this marriage, and that has not worked. I'm sitting here without my needs met. And so why on earth would I replicate that in my outside partnerships? And so they talked about keeping a roster of cheating partners. They talked about keeping the bench full, keeping the candy jar full. There was not sentimentality in terms of how they regarded these men they were cheating with. It was not, oh, he's a knight on the white horse and he's going to, solve all my problems. There was none of that sort of mentality among the bulk of these women. And then they talked about how participation in these relationships was actually empowering for them. That there was empowerment in being able to set boundaries, to vet and say, I'm not going to choose you because, you don't like the same kind of sex or stamina or whatever it is. And there was empowerment in creating these boundaries and saying, I'm only going to see you these days, or I'm only going to do these particular sex acts because this is what I'm interested in doing. And if you don't meet my needs, I'm going to cut off this relationship. And I'm not going to feel badly about that.
Yeah.
And they talked about the fact that was really, really empowering. And many of them said, I'm having these frank conversations with these total strangers online about my sexual needs. And I really wish I had done that before I got married. And I thought, that's really interesting. We don't sit down and have these frank conversations, like how often would you think you want to have sex and things like that with someone that we're about to share our lives with, right? We think, oh, I love this person and they love me and it's all going to work itself out. And of course, we know from the data that's often not how it works at all. And so the ability to have those frank conversations and to highly bound those relationships was really empowering to them. And that came up throughout the narratives, that and the pragmatism and the fact that these relationships were absolutely relationships of utility and they were about pleasure. Those are the overwhelming, overarching themes of those interviews, which were fascinating. They were very fascinating women.
Yeah.
They were interesting, intelligent. They were great sense of humor. You can easily imagine them, at a party with a crowd around them, the crowd enraptured. They were fascinating women.
And can I ask, did they tend to go with younger men? I'm just wondering, was it younger, more virile men, for example?
I kind of thought that might come up as they started sort of telling me what was going on. But that really didn't come up. There were some women with older men. There were some women with younger men. There were some women with same age men. There didn't seem to be a pattern in terms of that. As I kind of anticipated that as well when they started talking about what they were after. I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm about to interview a whole bunch of women with younger men, but no.
Because the biggest question that would jump to me, but what about the guilt? How did they kind of justify it to themselves?
Yeah, that came up a lot. We talked a lot about that. So they would explain, what they're doing and how they're doing it and why they're doing it, right? And all the many and numerous benefits they were getting from these outside partnerships. And then they would talk about the fact that they felt incredibly guilty. Many of them said, I treat my primary partner much better, in part because I am not resentful because I'm going without my sexual needs being met, right? And in part because I'm happier because my needs are met. But also, many of them said, he'll do something, I get aggravated, and then I go to say something, and then I remember that I'm a cheating you-know-what, and so I don't say anything about it. They did have a lot of guilt. That came up repeatedly in the interviews. That came up a lot. So they just sort of lived with the guilt. And in terms of how they justified it, they circled back to that. If I don't get these needs met, I cannot keep staying in this marriage. And if I leave this marriage, it's going to be detrimental to everyone involved. And so I feel guilty, but I just don't see any other way.
Yeah. So the justification was almost kind of, it was a needs to save the marriage, as bizarre as that sounds.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of people struggle with that when I talk about the book, and they kind of poo-poo it and shrug it off. But I mean, if you just kind of step out of the morality and all that sort of thing and kind of put yourself in the shoes of someone that, you're with a partner you love, respect, they're your best friend. You absolutely cannot imagine your life without them. But at the same time, you're not getting your needs met. How long could you really go without getting your needs met? That's really the central question.
Thank you, Alicia. That's going to be the end of part 1. And in part 2, we're going to talk about chasing masculinity.
Okay.
Hi, welcome back to part 2 of the Sociology Show. I'm talking to Dr. Alicia Walker. In part 1, we talked about the secret life of the cheating wife. So let's move on to your other book, Chasing Masculinity. Shall I do the title again? So, Chasing Masculinity, Men, Validation and Infidelity.
Yes, less of a mouthful, right?
Yes. So I'm guessing this one came out of your interest from the first book.
Yes. So actually collected the data at the same time.
Okay.
I conducted interviews with men and women concurrent to one another. And I also did a survey alongside all of that. But
it was taken from the same website, wasn't it? Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. It was all collected at the same time, all taken from the Ashley Madison population. So it is important to think about the fact that you cannot necessarily take my findings and extrapolate them to, say, someone who sparks up something at the office or with their neighbor or something like that, because it's a very different dynamic. In both of these books, we're talking about people who purposely logged onto a website, created a profile, and then started vetting partners with the purpose of having an affair. And that's a very, very different experience than, I tripped and fell into an affair.
Yeah, premeditated, really, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's part of what fascinated me so much was, I think even if we disapprove, right, and we never do it ourselves, we can kind of understand, like, okay, two strangers meet eyes across the room, right? Okay, these things happen. But it's a whole different thing to premeditate an affair, right? It's a completely different thing there's absolutely no one on the horizon, and you're just logging on in the hopes of conjuring up someone. That's very, very different.
And what about the men then? So maybe this is a misconception based on what I've read, but the idea is that men cheat more than women and men do it just purely for sex. But I think your findings said that's not quite true, right?
Yes. And I'll be honest, in the beginning, I was only really interested in women's cheating. Yeah. And so when men started to approach me for interviews, I was kind of ambivalent about it, but thought, well, I'll collect the data. Because I did, I guess, worry that it was just going to be a bunch of men saying, I'm cheating for sex and et cetera, et cetera. And I thought that's not going to be very interesting, right? And initially, when you ask these men, what brought you to the decision to do this? They would say it was sex, but then very quickly they would reveal it really wasn't about sex at all, even though that was their initial answer, which I kind of thought was fascinating. So I guess they're hearing the same narrative that we're hearing, right? Yeah. So we know from the data that men and women actually cheat at roughly the same rates. We just have this idea that men cheat more. And as far as the motivations for cheating, it's not really as gendered as it seems. And I know you're like, really? Because you just wrote 2 books, one about women and one about men. That seems pretty gendered. Well, I only analyze the women's data first and then analyze the men's data later. So that's part of the reason. But also what I found was it really wasn't about gender at all, even though it initially looked like it was gendered. It actually isn't. So remember those little subgroup of 7 women that I mentioned in part 1, and I didn't really talk about them very much. So 7 women in my first study were completely different than the rest of the women. They were cheating. They were looking for an emotional connection with someone. Yes, they were having sex with someone, but they were looking for an emotional connection. And they described really unsatisfying primary partnerships, okay, where they were not getting their emotional needs met. There was some kind of emotional disconnect between them and their primary partner. And so they were outsourcing, but they were trying to outsource an entirely different aspect of the relationship. And I would argue a much more difficult aspect to outsource. So in the men's group, you see a similar pattern in that I have the bulk of the men who are saying what those 7 women are saying, which is, yes, I'm having sex with this person. Yes, there was a sexual deficit in my primary relationship, but what I'm really trying to do is get these emotional needs met. That's actually the most important thing to me. That's the thing that I value. That's the thing that I'm looking for. And then a small group of my men were like the large group of women that I interviewed who were, it was really just about sex for them. And so what looked like a gender phenomenon really wasn't gendered at all. Their motivations for cheating were really about the quality and the dynamic of their primary partnership. So folks who are in a primary partnership where things are really good, but there's not sex or not adequate sex, they're trying to outsource sex. And folks that are in a primary partnership where they feel like their emotional needs are not being met, they're trying to outsource their emotional needs. But the bulk of the men that I spoke to were trying to outsource their emotional needs. Now, their discussions were different from the women's. What they told me was they felt like a disappointment to their primary partner. They felt like they couldn't do anything right. She was impossible to please, no matter how much they did. You know, it didn't seem like it was enough. They did talk about extremely unsatisfying sexual dynamics in those partnerships. Some of them were actually intensely sad to read. But what happened was, so you have these women who are telling you like, oh, yeah, I have sex with my partner, but it's not satisfying. And so I'm just going to, go find somebody that can take care of it. These men are having these unsatisfying encounters with their wives, and they're internalizing that as some problem with them, which is kind of interesting in and of itself.
Because one of the words that I notice comes up a lot is emasculation, isn't it?
Yes.
So do you want to say a little bit more of that? Did the majority of males feel emasculated by their partner, and if so, how?
Yes, that came up in every single interview I did with men. That word or some version of that word came up with every single one of them. And they just basically talked about the fact that they really, truly believed that their primary partner was disinterested in them, both as a sexual partner, but also as a person. They felt that she wasn't interested in like the details of their day or their fears and concerns and dreams and things like that. And they were not interested in sex with them. Even the few men who were having regular sex with their primary partner described these sexual encounters that for them were extremely unsatisfying because of their perception of the primary partner's disinterest. They felt like she wasn't enthusiastic about sex, and she wasn't interested in like a extended sensual kind of encounter, if you will. And all those things made them feel emasculated. And they talked about how they, before they had decided to go on Ashley Madison, they had went through this extended period of, feeling really bad about themselves and their self-esteem and not feeling like they were very manly. There was definitely this sense of this need for external validation, and that the validation needed to come from a female romantic sexual partner. And that she basically has the power to say, you, my friend, are very masculine, or, you're not. Even if she doesn't say you're not, just her disinterest, if he perceives her as disinterested in him, that was emasculating for them as well. And of course, I have no idea what the actual dynamics are with their wives. I can't tell you that their wives were indeed disinterested in them, but that's their perception of what's going on.
Do you know what's really interesting? I reckon if you did a straw poll with people and you said one group is claiming that their partner's showing disinterest in them and the other's sexually unsatisfied, most people would go for the other way around.
Yes.
Most
Yeah.
people would assume it's the man saying they wanted more sex and the woman saying that their partner is not showing interest in them. Or am I being stereotypical myself there?
Well, no, I think that is probably the assumption. And yeah, I think you're right. If you asked 10 people on the street, they would have assumed that things would have shaken out the opposite way of what they did. Yeah.
But are there any other sort of classic differences between the reasons behind male and female infidelity?
So the small subgroup of women and the bulk of the men were all searching for an emotional connection with someone, right? But a big difference between the men was that they talked a lot about needing validation and how important it was. So many of them said to me, you may think you know what men are like. You may think you understand men, but let me tell you something. I bet you don't understand this. We need way more praise than you could ever imagine that we need, which I thought was kind of fascinating. The fact that they were self-aware enough to realize that and that they were willing to admit that. I thought that was kind of fascinating. And that came up repeatedly, that men acknowledged, I need a lot of praise. I need a lot of validation. I need a lot of attention. And so what they sought in their outside partnerships, yes, they wanted to have sex with them, sure. And they wanted a very specific kind of sex. So whereas the women, they wanted to have the sex they wanted, yes, but the kind of sex they wanted varied tremendously from woman to woman in that study. The men all described the same kind of sex. They all wanted to have what you might call in the mainstream culture, the girlfriend experience, right? So they want to have sensual sex, spend hours having sex with the partner, and they want her to be like very, very enthusiastic and very vocal about her orgasms. They really experienced women's orgasms as an accomplishment they have brought on. They saw themselves as uniquely skilled in being able to provoke orgasm. And because they had this unique skill, it was their responsibility to provide orgasms. And so that was another part of their frustration with their primary partner, who, is either not interested in having sex with them at all, or if she's going to have sex with them, she just wants to kind of get it over with, like it's a chore, and sort of move on. And that was really an affront, right? Both to their masculinity, but also their sense of themselves as like, I am this extremely skilled orgasm provider.
Yeah.
Where
for both men and women, actually, were the relationships they were having, the extramarital relationships, were they relatively short-lived, or were these quite often going on for years and years?
It really depended. So women often switched up partners fairly frequently, or they either switched up partners frequently, or if they were seeing someone sort of long-term, they had multiple other partners. So maybe they're seeing you one time a month, and they're seeing this other person 2 times a month, and they see this person once a month, and you understand? Or they're just switching up a lot. They talked about, I want to try different parts of the menu. I want to try out different kinds of people. I get bored. With the men, they were really trying to find a partner kind of for the long haul. They were really interested in finding a partner who was going to be enthusiastic in bed, but also concerned about their day and interested in them as a person, and, give me a lot of attention and validation and praise, et cetera, et cetera. And so if they found someone like that, they wanted to keep that going. And unlike the women, where the bulk of them had these concurrent partnerships going on, men were trying to sort of replicate monogamy in their cheating. Only a very small, handful of them said, I just go from woman to woman, or I have multiple relationships. The bulk of them, they were trying to have ongoing things. So I talked to some folks who, they'd been seeing their partner for years and decades. Some of them had newish partners that they'd only been seeing for months, but their intent was to continue that as long as they possibly could.
As you're talking through this, Alicia, I reckon a lot of listeners are sat here panicking now. I tend
to have that effect on people, yeah.
But there'll be a lot of people listening in long-term relationships, marriages, and so on. Kind of thinking, well, just how common is this?
That is a great question, and we can't really answer it, to be honest. Yes, there are publications that will give you rates of infidelity participation, absolutely, but here's the issue. Most of them utilize data from face-to-face interviews, often face-to-face interviews that have taken place with the partner sitting right next to you. So you're probably not going to be honest about that, right? And those tend to place participation fairly low, like somewhere in the 20 to 38% or so. Studies that have used other means show much higher rates. There's some studies that place it at about 50 or 60%. There's others that place it at about 85%. We honestly have no idea the actual incidence of infidelity. All we can really say is that we assume that it's higher than what the mainstream reports have shown us. We assume it to be higher than, say, 38%. But it's impossible for us to really know because it's such a closeted behavior.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Understand why
I can tell you this. I get at least a couple emails a month from folks, usually men who, I guess once the men's book comes out, I'll start getting them from women. But men who are emailing me who have discovered their wife is cheating or they think their wife is cheating. I get several of those a month myself.
I can understand. And could I ask you what else you've kind of learned overall from the research, Alicia, to finish off?
Well, we have this idea that if someone cheats on us, they don't love us, right? That's a fairly common idea. If I discover someone's cheating on me, it absolutely means they don't love me, they don't respect me, and the appropriate response is I should set all their belongings on fire in the yard, right? That's apparently not the case based on the folks I've interviewed. Just about everyone I've spoken to deeply, deeply loves their partner and truly wishes that they could get everything that they needed from their spouse. It's just not the case for them. So I would say one of the big overarching things is that while the discovery that you've been cheated on is, of course, devastating and shattering, and I completely understand that, I think we do need to find some way to step away from this idea that it means that the person doesn't love you. Now, maybe that doesn't mean that you stay in the marriage. I don't know. But I think that's definitely something we've got to re-examine. I think this idea that we're not having these intense, graphic, explicit conversations about our expectations in terms of sex with, folks we're thinking about moving in with and getting married to, I think we need to examine that. I think we could learn something from these women and their vetting practices for certain. I think that you can have two people in the same marriage having a completely different experience of that marriage. I don't know how I would run it, but I would love to run a study where I'm talking to somebody who's cheating and somebody who's married to the person and doesn't know they're cheating. I think that'd be a fascinating study, although I have no idea how I would run it, because I bet you I would get two really different versions of the same marriage.
And I know it does open up the question, which I think it says in one of your books, about why do we see cheating as such a big deal?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we do.
Yeah.
Here in the States, consistently, it's 90, better than 90%, 95, 98% of folks will say that cheating is always wrong all the time under all circumstances. And yet we know that folks are cheating, right?
Well,
so we have this.
By the statistics, yeah. If 99% are saying that and 30, 40, 50% are cheating, then the statistics don't add up, do they?
Oh yeah, no, we've got a huge disconnect between what folks think is okay to do and what folks are actually doing. And to me, what that says is we have a disconnect between what we think we should be doing and what we can withstand. The big takeaway I had from these interviews were that there are some people in real pain and desperation who go on these websites and search for partners, and they're desperate to hold their marriages together, and they're desperate to get their needs met. And those things seem very incompatible, but we do have a lot of folks who are making that work and are staying in those marriages. I followed up with the folks that I've interviewed. Very few of them have ended their marriages. Most of them are still married. So we're asking a lot of marriage, right? Asking a lot of one single relationship in our lives. And it seems like maybe we shouldn't be asking that much out of one single relationship, because it seems like we have a lot of marriages that aren't living up to all that we ask. And we have a lot of folks in a lot of pain.
That is both fascinating and slightly terrifying in equal measures, I think, for a lot of
Yes. Yes, it is. It absolutely is.
Thank you so much for your time today, Alicia. Could I ask you to just give some details if people want to find out more about your work or read the books? Where should they go to?
Sure, absolutely. If you want to find out more about my work, you can check out my website, alicia-walker.com. I have links to publications and media coverage and links to purchasing the books. My newest book is, you can find it at the publisher's website, Palgrave Macmillan. They're doing pre-orders, but it will be in print on the 17th of October. And my first book you can find on Amazon. You can find it at the publisher's website, which is Lexington Books. But I have links to either book for purchase on my website as well.
Excellent. And you're on Twitter as well, if people
And I'm on Twitter, yes. Instagram, though not as active as I am on Twitter. I'm on Twitter every day.
And I hope you're not too inundated with messages saying, "I think my partner's cheating."
I do get a fair amount of them, and they are very sad. I do feel terribly for folks who have made that discovery.
Thank you so much again for your time today, Alicia. I really appreciate it.
No, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
If you are a regular listener to the Sociology Show, then you could help with the costs of promoting and hosting the podcast. If you can spare even a small amount, then you can donate on the GoFundMe.com website by searching for The Sociology Show. There is no obligation, of course, and all future downloads will continue to be free. A huge thank you to all those that have already donated. Your kind gesture will help to keep the show going and growing. Best wishes and keep enjoying the show.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email the sociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.